Hey, good morning. A lot of background noise, road noise from the highway that's a few blocks away. So, not sure how the audio is going to be. Impedance, that word that I hope I wrote down for name of this video, impedance. So, if you hear that word, you probably think about slowing things down, right? You're going to go for a walk down a trail, you remember. But when you get there, it's overgrown with blackberry bushes. That's impedance. Or that's unimpedance, right? Something you might have to go through or get around. It's going to slow you down, or it might not. It might even speed you up if you work it right, you know? But either way, you're liable to get scratched. So, impedance, when you get into the physics world, is that same idea. But you have to go out and find those blackberry bushes. They're much more subtle. There's equations about impedance. And there's a point in electronics where resistance that you've heard about in electricity, right? You know what a resistor is. You know that your toaster uses electricity and has resistance. But when the frequency of the electricity increases, there's rules of impedance that start to become required in order to understand what's going on. So somewhere in the electron excitation, the energy spectrum that electrons can encompass, the rules change. So I have another videos, I've called this boundary layer physics, where the rules, they really don't change, they get more complicated. You go from, in a closed system, P V equals T, pressure times volume equals temperature, if you're using the right scales. Kelvin and absolute scales and such. So this impedance word is huge. Now, I was taught how this works learning radar theory, because when that radar set releases a blast in gigawatts or terawatts of energy, free electrons released out of the horn, it's no longer traveling in a conductive environment. It's in the air. It has to be able to excite the electrons in a wave shape in whichever direction it was pointed. And for radar, you expect it to bounce back so you can see it. So inside of that is physics of interferometry, interference in spatial quantums. So it gets complicated. It gets very hard to explain. It gets into the mystical and the magical. Because when I mention these frequencies, you get into the potential for mystical speak and crystals and electric universe and other elements of energy that explain some little parts, or are little parts, of a very big picture with multiple variables, multivariate analysis. Anybody? So I suppose you could go look at the equations for resistance and maybe the equations for impedance, and it's hard to discern where you have to go from resistance to impedance, where the terms meet. So if I'm sitting with electrical engineers and we're talking transformer efficiency, these are the rules and laws of impedance and the transformer windings and the proximity of one coil to another and phase variance and phase cancellation. So when you go into the well, you can find you can find the bottom usually. So there's impedance. Impedance is also a linguistic analytics term. If you can impede a conversation and slow it down, you can change its direction. And that's useful for run-on sentences, to impede that run-on sentence and paragraph from continuing because it just makes no sense. So with this impedance comes confidence intervals around what's going to happen. We're pretty confident when that pulse, that gigawatt pulse created in a pulse-forming network, that triggers a ionizing cavity tuned to a specific frequency. And boy, did I just butcher that because I'm trying to keep the video short. Make you think? Impedance. It's everywhere. It's base reflectivity in a high-frequency signal that gets returned to a receiver and interrogated. Using noise cancellation techniques. Thanks.